Welcome in everyone to this WRPS exclusive with the head coach of Rockland Baseball, Coach Doyle. First off, congratulations. The moment I graduate, you get the head coaching job. So
I appreciate that.
how
Yeah.
how's that been the past 7 years? Just be like, because how's the adjustment period for becoming the head coach?
It was pretty smooth at the beginning. I worked under Coach LaCorey for a while. So I had adapted a lot of his philosophies and his practice methods. And, it was a smooth transition for the kids that had played for me for JV into varsity and the kids that were already there on varsity with Coach LaCorey. There wasn't too much of a difference as far as how we approach things. So it was pretty smooth.
Yeah, and one of the few things you talked about was actually one of your captains, Gavin Matos, moving out to the outfield. How's that transition been for him? Because I'm assuming he was in the infield last season as well.
Oh, it's been fantastic. Gavin actually came in. He's been an ultimate team player. Gavin came in as a third baseman as a freshman. I had two or three kids that could play third base. Gavin was just as good as any of them, but I had no catcher in that age group. So I had challenged Gavin to become a catcher. He had done a great job for the past few years, but it really wasn't his natural position. So he had done everything we had asked him to do. He worked his butt off. And then this year we had Colin Rao, who is more of a natural catcher. So we were able to put Gavin out in the outfield where he's certainly a lot more comfortable. And you can see it on both sides. He's playing great defense out there, and his bat's coming alive. It's just definitely a much more comfortable spot for him, and it helps the team a lot.
Yeah, and talking about comfortability, I mean, at least it's not like Thursday where it was like 50-mile-per-hour winds where we nearly got blown off our broadcast. We had to hold on to the camera multiple times. It was something else. Well, obviously, this warmer weather is probably better fit for the kids as well, just to get them adjusted to games down the stretch as well.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure all spring coaches can tell you, by the time the weather gets nice, unfortunately, the season's almost over. So it's a spring sport by name only. The majority of the season you played, it's cold, rainy. It is windy, as you saw the other day. The wind was howling. I got to watch some of the tape you guys had of the game. You guys did a fantastic job, but you guys are battling the wind the whole game.
Literally, the entire recording. I'm not even like the wind was a special guest the entire time.
Oh yeah.
Like even I watched it back and I'm like, wow, it's really that windy. Afterwards I mentioned it to a few people. I literally couldn't feel my legs. Like it was that bad. I definitely had to warm up. But yeah, overall, talking about that, has there been like a game that like stands out as like one of the worst weather games that you've ever been in as a head coach?
Tough to say. We've played in a lot of cold games. We haven't played Hanover in a long time. I always remember as a player, we always played them early in the year, and I associate Hanover's baseball field with just being freezing all the time, rainy. Since I've been coaching, the first half of the year is just always cold and rainy, and you're just battling the elements. No particular game stands out, but we've been lucky. The past few years, for the most part, we've been able to get outside early. I know my first few years coaching, when I was a volunteer with Coach LaCorey, as a JV coach, I mean, there were years that we were stuck practicing indoors for 2 weeks before we can even get on a field, and then next thing you know, the first game's here. So, we've been lucky as far as getting outside, but you're certainly still battling the cold and the wind.
Yeah, it's usually when fake spring comes around where it's like 80 degrees, and then right when your games start, that's when it's like 50 degrees, 45 degrees, and stuff like that. But going back to your players and going back to production, we were highlighting Levy a lot because Levy had a fantastic game. We saw that he had pitched 5 innings and he also had 6 strikeouts as well. How was his development along with Nicholson Ben? Because you mentioned both of them were freshmen last year and they have just even more room to grow, even though they're just sophomores.
They've done a great job. I think last year was definitely going through some growing pains. They did a fantastic job, but they went from, being in 8th grade pitching for their clubs against other 8th graders to less than a year later being freshmen pitching, essentially against men. You're seeing 17, 18-year-old kids on some of these teams, and it was definitely challenging for them. But they answered the bell. They showed up every time they had a start, even in relief, and they just went out there and battled. You see it this year. They're realizing that you're not going to be able to strike every batter out, which they may have been able to do in 8th grade, and you got to be good with your pitches, and soft contact is just as good as a strikeout. And trust your defense, and they're doing a great job. They're battling. They're keeping us in games. Early on in the season, they both struggled a little bit with some walks, but you've seen the adjustments they've made just in the past 2 starts each, limiting those walks, making teams earn everything they get, and their growth has been great so far. And I'm really looking forward to see how it continues.
Yeah,
Only sophomores.
yeah, obviously, and just talking about that as well. It's just obviously not only for baseball, but for any sport,
Yep.
especially I recognize it as well, especially that little league to high school jump is bigger than when people expect. But when you let them go through those growing pains, that really helps them out a lot as well.
For sure, for sure. And you always find that balance of getting kids experience at the varsity level and hoping it helps down the road, but also letting them to develop. And one of the things we've struggled with here at Rockland for the past 7-8 years really is just the numbers of kids that play baseball. And there's certain times as kids that would benefit from developing at the JV level that are not given that luxury, and they're forced right into varsity games. And for some kids, that's great. They learn from it. They get better. The speed of the game, and you really see that growth. But from other kids, it can be a little bit challenging, and they have to learn how to really be mentally tough and realize that it's hard playing varsity baseball at any age, especially when you're 14 years old. So the numbers game sometimes works in these kids' favor, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think this group in particular has done a fantastic job getting the call at a very young age to play varsity baseball. They did a lot of really good things last year as freshmen and sophomores. We only had one senior last year in Sean Boostrom, so a lot of these young kids played a lot, and you can see the growth they've made and ready to go compete this year. It's fun to see.
Yeah, you mentioned players that when we talked to you before and before the whole game, like people like Hatch, LaRocco having over 300 batting averages going into the season. Has there been anyone this far into the season that's really surprised you, that really has stepped above what their expectation was?
Oh, for sure, for sure. A lot of, and we mentioned Gavin Matos. His batting average, I believe he's second or third on the team right now. He's doing a great job. Colin Rao, he was a mid-season call-up last year from JV, and now he's batting in the leadoff spot. He's hitting for average, hitting for power, doing a fantastic job. I can go up and down the lineup here. Cooper Larocco, again, he was a mid-season call-up 2 years ago from JV. Just battled down there, got called up, and then was our leadoff hitter last year. He's kind of worked his way into like the second leadoff spot, where he's very successful. Colin McKenna had a fantastic sophomore year. Last year he struggled a little bit, hit a little bit of a junior slump. I thought he was actually pressing a little bit too hard to do too much. This year he looks very relaxed, and he's been a staple in the middle of our lineup, just RBIs and getting on base and playing solid all around. So I can go up and down the lineup. I'm sure I'm missing some kids here. Dustin Air, freshman, thrown right into the 4 spot in the lineup.
He's been fantastic.
Yeah,
especially the game we saw. Unfortunately, we weren't able to broadcast the game against Spelman, but I'm assuming that was also a tough win as well.
Yeah. So we lost. That was a tough one against Spelman. We gave up a few unearned runs, which has kind of been a little bit of our Achilles heel we've been working on. But Dustin Air, on both sides of the ball, has been fantastic. It's challenging when you don't have a defensive home, so to speak. So his bat is good enough that he's going to find himself in the lineup. But depending on who's pitching, he could find himself at third base, shortstop, left field, second base.
Yeah.
Which is a challenge in itself, but he does a great job. He answers the call, and he's just a baseball player. He just loves baseball. He doesn't care where I tell him to go play. He wants to be in the lineup, and he's a fun player to watch.
Yeah, obviously. And then one of the last things that you did mention to us going into the whole game was how you wanted to minimize those earned runs, minimize the mistakes.
Correct.
Minimize the times where you see the wild pitches, you see, the stolen bases because they don't get control of the ball. And against a pretty good Hull team, you actually were able to hone that in and that's really one of the reasons that was the difference maker, because they had more mistakes than you.
Yeah, that certainly helped. We're challenging our pitchers to throw strikes. And in this league in particular, you're going to see a lot of good baseball players. Abington, Cohasset, Mashpee, they've, perennially found themselves in deep playoff runs in Division 4 and Division 5, and then you go up to Division 3, and teams like East Bridgewater have just always been in the conversation for state title. Last year there, Middleborough, just a perennial powerhouse up in Division 2, always making deep runs. So, day in, day out, we're going to see good hitters. Hull always has their top 2 or 3 guys. Say what you want about some of their records, but their top 2 or 3 guys in the lineup can always hit the ball well. They're just not as deep as some of these other teams, but their top guys are as good as anybody. So we're challenging our pitchers to throw strikes, we got to play better defense behind them. You're not going to get all these guys out with strikeouts. So we got to do a better job defensively. It's kind of been a big point of emphasis of ours. We haven't done it consistently. Some days, like the other day against Hull, certainly better than others. But you saw Hull, we had that one mistake out in center field on a drop ball, and, it led to a 3-run inning. And, that happens really fast when you're not playing good defense. So that's something we're just trying to tighten up every day, continue to get better at. Some of the guys playing great defense right now. Austin Daly's played a great second base for us. He's pressing a little bit at the bat, but he's a good hitter. He's going to come around. But defensively, he's done a great job over at second base, and he's made some big plays to make sure other innings don't go longer than they have to on that side of the ball.
Yeah, with your practices going into future games going forward, obviously we're going to be streaming some of these games on YouTube on the WRPS Rockland YouTube channel. Subscribe. Is that one thing that you're focusing on, especially with practices nowadays, is just worrying about like fielding, like just worrying about those errors, because those, especially in the first inning, it looked like it was lost before it even started with that miss with that center fielder, and that led to Hull getting that first run before really it got out of hand for them, obviously. And Rockland had those 2 innings where they were just automatic, even with capitalizing on Hull's mistakes.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, you always want to, hit home all just do the little things well. It's great when you can come up and, drive that triple or that home run, or you make that diving play. That's exciting stuff. It gets the crowd into it, gets the players into it. But, more times than not throughout the game, it's just be consistent doing the little things well, and, use your mechanics. And, that's stuff that we work on day to day. Every once in a while you add in some new tactical stuff, but for the most part, it's our technical skills and just trying to be consistent.
Are you trying to get Levy to do what McFarland did, where he just caught the pitch in the midair? That was, for my first broadcast, I was screaming at the top of my lungs because that was just such an impressive play. But I mean, like we said before, Hull is an impressive team, and I think going into this home stretch is sort of like building that momentum to try and get to the playoffs.
Yeah, I think we've seen him pitch against us now for the past few years. He's done a great job getting some soft contact and keeping his team in games as long as he can. He's done a great job. Yeah, Levy, last year we challenged him. He did a great job as a freshman. He was a little on the slow side. So we challenged him and said, listen, if you want to, play this game at this level and you don't want to be a PO, you got to get yourself in shape and you got to be a little bit more athletic. And, he did. He had a great basketball season, and it's carried over into a baseball season. You could see his athleticism has definitely improved. He answered the call, as did a lot of these kids. They spent, all winter hitting in the cage, and you're seeing that as one of our best offensive starts, and as long as I can remember. They've put the time in. Kids like Caleb Wallow, who spend every Saturday in the cage hitting, and he's just ready when his number's called. And I can't say enough good things about the work that this group has put in.
Yeah, and one of the last questions is going off of that is just, do you think that chemistry is playing a huge factor? Because this is a group that is still young, that there's not many seniors on this group, that really that off-season chemistry and that off-season training together, that's going to do wonders for not even this season, but maybe seasons going forward as well.
Oh, for sure. And that was one of those things we talked about early in the season, where we have a group of 3 seniors and a handful of juniors that always played together growing up, throughout Little League and Junior League, Junior Legion. And then we have a group of sophomores and freshmen that played together growing up. And now they're trying to blend to be one team. And they've done a really good job of that. You have different kids from different backgrounds, different social settings, all in one locker room with one common goal to win baseball games. And, they're doing a fantastic job. I think they're doing a good job setting the tone and really showing the JV team, how things are supposed to be approached and what you need to do to win games. And I'm very happy with the chemistry. I'm very happy with the hard work. And, they're doing a fantastic job, and hopefully it'll lead to a few more wins moving forward.
Of course, Coach Doyle, an honor as always. I mean, it reminds me of a certain person in high school back in the day who was really good at the pacer test. I mean, he could help with the base running, but I gave up baseball like 5 years old. Yeah. I was one of those people that was like picking grass out of like the outfield. I got hit in the head once, and I'm like, I'm done.
Yeah, sometimes getting hit by a pitch in Little League is enough to just make you be done. You see that a lot.
It was one of those cartoon ones that was like right off the head, and then I didn't know where the ball was, and I thought, oh, grade 5 concussion. It was, but with that being said, that's going to do it for us. Again, thank you so much for taking the time for doing this, and then we'll see you for the next home broadcast. It should be a lot of fun and should be really exciting.
Looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.